Well, I am super excited to have with me my dear friend. Short time when we've known each other, but like
Fast friends.
I know, fast, right? Like
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
we're in it together already.
Yep.
Already, foxhole friends.
That's right.
Um, I have Aubrey Sampson with me, and Aubrey co-planted and serves on the teaching and preaching team at Renewal Church there in Chicagoland. She is nominated. That's a great word. Oh, an award nominated author and contributor to Propel Women. So Aubrey preaches and speaks around the country at churches, ministry events. She and her husband and their 3 sons live and minister in Chicagoland area. But she just came out with her most recent book, Known, which looks at how God names us and what happens when we start believing that and participating with that. Because isn't that the journey? Isn't that the work right there?
Isn't that the whole thing right there? It's so fun to be here, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
So excited to have you. I'm okay. The truth is I get excited about all my guests, but that's because I love all of the people. And it's always fun to have conversations with your friend.
That's awesome. Yes, that's right. It's so fun.
So here's the first question.
Okay.
I want to talk to you today about this idea of shame and how it affects our leadership and our cultures that we build, because you are also a leader in your church and in your area.
Yeah.
And it's this thing that definitely affects our discipleship. And I think we talk about that just a little bit, although we could always talk about that more.
Yeah.
But I want to talk with you about how that affects our leadership.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for you, what was an aha moment for you about how being known by God changes the way we experience shame? And this idea that, wow, God sees me, God likes me, not just loves me, but likes me. And what was kind of that moment for you, or something that helped you look at shame differently and look at that being known by God differently?
Yeah. I feel like this is like the journey of my life. I mean, we all sort of like write and preach about what we need, right? So the journey of my life is that I like to achieve, and I like other people's approval. And that's never a great place to be when that's sort of like, it's not flowing from your identity, right? When instead it's
but
like
that's like what we want out of life, though. We want to achieve. It gets us into leadership positions for sure.
It does get us into leadership positions, and it's actually not a bad thing. I mean, I think because sometimes, you can like feel alive, like, oh, I'm too driven. I'm too, I think that's all a lie, like, especially for women. But I do think where it can be distorted by shame is when you're going, oh, whatever tribe or person, I want your approval. I want you to see my achievements. Oh, you fill my cup. You tell me I'm worthy. That's where it gets, and we do this with parents. We do this with boyfriends. We do this with scholars, with leaders we like, anyway. So, I would say an aha moment for me, I was speaking somewhere, and I mean, I've been doing this a long time, Jesse, but I was speaking somewhere, and
You look so young, darling.
Oh, thank you. For 4 days after, I was like, oh, I should have said this, should have said that, totally screwed that up. I didn't mention blah, blah, blah. And like, it got to the point where I was like, I couldn't sleep at night because I was just totally analyzing everything I had done wrong. And it wasn't like I was getting negative feedback. It was like fine feedback. I think it went well, but I couldn't get out of my head. And I realized how often I'm just literally trying to save myself. Like I am trying to make myself righteous before people. I'm so operating from a place of not God's beloved daughter, but some enslaved person who desperately needs someone else to tell me I'm a good leader, a good speaker. So anyway, all that to say, it's exhausting. And it's like, it's exhausting, but until you like hit the wall of enough exhaustion. So I remember I was talking to my spiritual, you asked about an aha moment. I was talking to my spiritual director about this, and saying to her things like, I can't believe I'm still struggling with this. I should know better than this. Just even shame language around the shame I was feeling. You know what I mean? It's like shame on shame on shame.
Yeah.
And she was like, girl, it's time for you to have a little bit of grace for yourself. What
Mm,
if, what if instead of being in this shame spike cycle, you just went, oh, there it is again. I'm trying to save myself. God, would you remind me that I'm your daughter and I'm just going to give this to you? You save me. I can't save myself. And
mm,
I know that sounds so simple, Jesse, but it was the most profound thing because it was the difference between like beating myself up and seeing myself as a beloved daughter loved by Jesus and grace even for my shame. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And so
Oh,
I think to be able to you know, it will be real that all of us in leadership or all of us speaking or whatever, you're going to have days where you're going to go, oh, I should have done this instead. That's, that's part of learning and growing. And like, I think we actually should grow that way. But I think the difference to be able to go, and also, man, my father, my God loves me so much as his daughter, and like go take a nap. You know what I mean? Like, so both things can be
yeah.
true. I can grow and learn and do better next time. And I'm so, 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 so loved. My identity is loved by God. And I think that is that's the whole journey for all of us, right? Like,
Mm. Right, where we
uh,
can screw up and there's just not all this weird energy around it,
there's
right?
not
Because
all
it's
this
not
weird
like,
energy. We don't obsess about it, and it's not
yeah,
our whole everything. It's just like, oh yeah, I'll learn from that. Next time I speak, it'll be great. Trusting God did something there. Now I'm gonna go take a nap because God loves me. It's just
oh my
like
gosh.
such
So
a
you know what?
softer approach.
What helped me like even be aware that I was behaving weird about stuff? Okay, this is gonna sound strange, but it was my dog. I had a very emotionally intelligent dog, but like I could correct her and she'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry." And then once we repaired, like once, like she's
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm like, "Are you sorry?" And she gives me her paw and she's like, "Okay, tell me I'm okay." And then she would just
Mm.
move on with her life. Like she was aware enough to know that she'd screwed up. She wanted
Yeah.
emotional repair, but she
Yeah.
didn't carry shame with her. Like she
Wow.
didn't like keep
Yeah.
having to check in like, "Oh, am I
Right.
okay? Oh,
Am
am
I
I
still
okay?"
okay?
Like
Right.
she just moved on. I mean, she could be naughty in the next 5 minutes and we'd have to do it
Yeah.
again, right?
Right.
Like I was like, "Oh my gosh, my dog lives
Mm.
self like with emotional intelligence, but not this
Wow.
level of self-consciousness. What is
Wow.
wrong with
What's wrong with
me?
me that I can't do that?
My dog has more freedom than I do." Like I was like, "Oh my gosh,
Wow, that's
what is
actually
my problem?"
powerful. Yeah, yeah, right? And it is a human problem. I mean, I think that's where we can sort of step back and
Mm.
laugh at ourselves and like, okay, God, thank you that you stepped in to even this problem. You know what I mean? But you're right. Like your dog has more freedom than I do.
Right? Close up.
Yeah, that's real right there. That's real right there. So
Oh
I
my
think
gosh.
just being, like that, knowing we're so known and
Mm.
accepted, right? That changes everything because suddenly we're living from approval and not for it. And
Right.
that's game
Right.
changing in
My
leadership,
my
right?
dog has more secure attachment with me as a human than I do with God, the almighty, most perfect being in the
Yeah.
universe,
Wild.
right?
Yeah.
Seriously. So
Unbelievable.
it just, yeah, it just kind of, it's that thing that brings
Mm-hmm.
perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I love, I love your story. And I'm just interested then, like, how did it impact your leadership?
Yeah.
Like help
Mm-hmm.
show us the ripple effects of that
Yep.
aha moment
Yep.
into the rest of your life and
Mm-hmm.
your leadership and how
Mm-hmm.
you started to think about that differently.
Mm-hmm. I would say, and I think this is probably true in the Western American church in particular, like this would not be unique to me. So I think, uh, those of you who are listening from that context will understand this. I was swinging back and forth in my leadership between I suck, I'm not enough, I can't do this, who do I think I am? And oh, I'm going to build a tower unto my own name. I'm going to professionalize my brand and make a name for Aubrey Sampson. And it was just like this pendulum of just like not enough, or I need to be something that's recognized. And it was like the difference. It was like I was exchanging being seen for being known,
Mm.
or just berating myself. Do you know what I mean? Like there
So
was
you equated being seen with being known.
oh
And then when you weren't
yes.
seen, you were like, yeah, because
Yes.
neither of which were being known.
Neither of which are being known. Neither of which are being known.
Wow.
And I think that that's probably, unfortunately, the reality of a lot of leadership in the
Hmm.
American West right now, is either we just think we're not doing a good enough job at ministry or church leadership or whatever, and so we're burnout and we're done, or we feel like we have to like professionalize our names and like build a tower unto ourselves, right? So so that's how it played out ultimately, just kind of this pendulum swing, right? And I'm so grateful for God's kindness, because I just feel like in the middle of that, God just kept like coming to find me, right?
Oh.
And I feel like God's goodness and God's invitation has continually, and for all of us really, is just like, just rest in me, stop as much as you can, stop wrestling, stop striving, stop earning, stop sacrificing to the old sacrificial system, and
Hmm.
instead rest in me, and part of some of the stories I tell in Known are really just God like reminding me, like, you're loved. You're loved. And what's funny about this is going back to shame, I've been a Christian for, let's see, like 33 years. And I feel like some of this stuff that I'm saying is very basic, foundational, like, you have a good God who loves you, like very basic kind of gospel stuff. But it's amazing to me that I feel like the journey the Lord has me on is like we're going back a little bit deeper, a little more intimately into that same truth, because there's a part of me like that goes, oh, you should know this by now. You're loved by a good God. But even that's like the shame voice, right? So
Right.
just God, like, hey, loved one, be loved, beloved. I feel like that's sort of the journey God consistently has me on. And I think to lead from that place, cup full, God's abundance, God's love for you, God's acceptance and approval from you, you can actually pour that out and minister to other people from that place, rather than from the place of like, do you like me? Fill my cup. Am I good enough for you? You know what I mean? And it's just,
Yeah.
one is graceful and one is God's there, and the other is just, we all know this, is just depleting and like, and it's insecure, and it's not good for the people you're leading either, because they sense that.
Right. Right. Because, I mean, I was raised the same kind of way. I was raised in a church that was very shaming, and that God loves you and you have to earn it on the back end. Like, you have
Yeah.
a debt you have to repay. Jesus paid your debt to God, but now you have a debt to Jesus. And you're like spending your life repaying that and earning the thing that he
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Right. You make yourself worthy of the great sacrifice that Jesus did on the cross. And, I just think that regardless of how we're raised or what environment we're raised in, because I'm sure that my parents never taught me that, like the church taught me that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think the fall causes us to hear that message first, like that every part of our heart has to come into that place of identity of daughtership and sonship, and believe that God actually, like, we have to be, every part of our heart has to be wooed out of that lie.
Yep. That's right. Yep.
And I think that you're right, that where we still wrestle with that, and I don't know if I get like completely redeemed in that on this side of eternity.
Yeah, maybe not.
I'm doing a lot of work for it, but I don't know if I get there.
Right.
But I think the interesting thing about leadership is that we bring, no matter what our assignment is, we always have those insecurities that are in there, and the assignment brings them out, right? It brings them to the surface.
Yeah.
And somehow we've convinced ourselves, or other people have convinced us, that if we just disassociate, if we just hold people at arm's length, if we just hide a little bit and only tell these things to like two people, our wife, our wife, right? Because you and I, neither of us have wives. We both have husbands. But, tell your wife, tell your spiritual director, tell your therapist, like, those are the people that can know about it. But otherwise, keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
And the lie is that it doesn't impact, like, we can somehow put a buffer in there that will keep it from impacting everyone else. And I don't think that's true. I've never seen that be true. Like, I think we all lead out of our relationship, the depth of our relationship with God.
Yeah.
So how have you seen shame and this wrestle like impact either your leadership in specific or other people's leadership? I mean, I'm not looking for you to tell stories of other people, but like,
Yeah.
what do you see like the fruit of this is in leadership? Because we can't hide it. We can't cover it up. We
Yeah,
can't put enough
I
buffers
mean,
in there.
unfortunately, I live and minister in Chicago, and we've seen,
Mm, mm,
man, the amount of
mm.
pastors who have allowed their shame to lead to like self-aggrandizement, and then somehow that's turned into like uh privilege, which is turned into you serve me. It's like, instead of, I mean, this is what's wild. It's like shame, I think, can either make you go, I'm not enough, I suck, I quit, I'll never do this again. And then people leave leadership, they even leave their relationship with the Lord. The other thing you see is how shame can become toxic and make you like this arrogant, power hungry. And so
That's the root of narcissism, isn't it?
that's it. And so, you know, in Chicago, the stories that we've seen of very well-known, quote unquote, famous pastors who
Mm,
I think have allowed their shame to rule their identity and their leadership,
mm,
the ripple effect is like, honestly, Jesse, like churches are falling apart.
mm.
People are beyond hurt and not sure if they can trust Jesus. Like, so the ripple effect is like, there's some relational pain and heartache that needs to be repaired. People aren't treated well in churches. They're not empowered in churches because it becomes all about the pastor and what they can do. But then I think the
Right,
larger ripple effect is like, literally people are walking away from Jesus
right.
because their leaders and their pastors have allowed shame to turn into a toxic identity. And it's maybe that's more general than you're looking for, but I mean, I think that's what's at stake. Do you know what I mean? When we allow
Yeah,
the enemy to let shame survive and control, because it turns narcissistic. Yeah, and then
yeah. Or,
abusive, and I mean, it's just,
mm, I mean, that what that gets me thinking about is that, I've been thinking about humans are humans, and as a psychologist and neuroscientist, like humans are like people
yeah,
are people,
yeah, right,
and we're we're talking about and experiencing and finally bringing voice to these toxic cultures that have
yeah,
been created in the church
yeah,
environment or in the spiritual environments, faith environments.
hmm,
I don't think it's just mega
right.
church only
No,
or
it's
whatever.
not.
Like, I don't
Yep,
think the model matters,
I agree with
right?
you on that wholeheartedly. Yep.
And it's so much more damaging than if you experience the same type of leadership in a workplace. And I've been kind of
Mm,
noodling around, like, what is some of the difference here? Because in a
mm,
workplace, when you have a toxic environment in a workplace or a toxic leader in a workplace, it somehow doesn't do the same damage. And I
interesting.
think I think that spiritual dynamic, right? Because you can have an abusive leader in the workplace,
Uh-huh.
and it is just that, and you can say yes or no to that. You can walk away or deal with it or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
Like there's your response to that. But when that same kind
yeah,
of thing happens in the church, it's not
yeah,
just abuse or neglect, which is a form of abuse, but
yep.
it's also spiritual abuse. Like, it will always
Mm,
be also spiritual abuse,
wow, yeah,
which isn't the same as true as the workplace, right? So the workplace, like, I've been in both the corporate environment and the
yeah,
ministry environment, and the workplace
yeah.
is so much cleaner because everything isn't also and spiritual abuse.
Interesting.
And I think that's because, like, this is my conclusion, and tell me what you think, and
Okay.
like, help me understand this. But
Okay.
the potential, because the church environment is that potential to identity formation and belonging, which
Yes,
isn't automatically assumed of the job. You can just have a job. But
totally.
because you're in a faith environment, and this journey of discipleship is an identity journey,
Yep.
and it's a faith community, like they're different,
Yep.
that openness to identity and belonging will
Yep.
always make the damage worse
Mm,
in a faith environment. the
yeah.
the impact of shame will always be stronger. The impact of insecure,
Yeah.
neglectful, or abusive
Yeah.
leadership will always be more
Yeah.
profound and amplified.
Yeah.
And so here's my conclusion, and like, you are the expert on, I mean, you're more expert than me on this for sure. But so it makes me think that spiritual maturity is about increasing that knowing and being known
Mm-hmm.
by God and others,
Mm-hmm.
so that we have less shame, or less, we confront our shame more. But like,
Mm.
what do you think about that? Like, the relationship of spiritual maturity to being
Mm.
known, being knowing others, having less shame in the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so interesting because if church truly is belonging, identity formation, family, community, like these, even marriage, we use that metaphor for the church. Like it makes sense that the damage done there would be so much deeper. Like, so I think that's really interesting that you're onto something. I think you're really onto something there. Why it feels so much deeper is that the abuse is always spiritual abuse. And I think you're right. I mean, this is what's wild about spiritual maturity is I do think spiritual maturity is we have associated it with I'm doing more. I mean, you and I both like learning, so I want to be careful about this, but I think we've said mental assent to certain ideas over union with Christ and with other people.
Yeah.
And and really I think the true mark of spiritual maturity is exactly right. Are we just vulnerably surrendering to the love of God and being known by other people and doing the work to really know and love other people? I mean, that's spiritual maturity. And I don't mean loving just like, oh, I love you, like loving towards Jesus. Are we all as a community becoming more and more like Christ? And I don't think becoming more and more like Christ means we're necessarily, I mean, I hope we're all about mission and going after things, but I don't think it's necessarily that we're doing more spiritual things and checking off the box and like we know more doctrine. And I think it really is this concept of like, deeper and deeper and deeper. Am I being known? Is my identity being formed by my good God? And out of that safety, can I be vulnerable with other people, naked, right? And
Yeah.
unashamed with
Yeah.
other people. And can I be the safe person for them to be naked and unashamed with me so that they experience the love of God through me? I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it's idealistic and perhaps you're right that until we meet Jesus face to face, but I still think that's the goal. And we tend to overcomplicate the goal. Like knowing and being known is such a good invitation. And of course, sin
Yeah.
and brokenness messes it up, but like, can we keep coming to God, asking for that and seeing it in the church? I just feel like, man, how we would thrive and see healing happen and the Spirit of God would move in such powerful ways.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate to be a part of a large community of about 200 people that lived like that. And I've been trying
Wow,
to
Jesse.
recreate it ever since, in
Mm,
pockets and stuff, but it is idealistic and it is possible.
yeah.
And man, I think about like how the world would be different, how ministry would be different, how the
Hmm.
church would be different if we were more like that. But
Yeah.
I mean, you have a book on this. You wrote about this.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about Known and
Yeah.
where people can find more about that.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I appreciate it. So Known was born out of some of this stuff we're talking about. Like
Mm,
I had written a book about overcoming shame and then written a book about spiritual practice of lament out of grief. And I think honestly, this Known was sort of just that next season of like, okay, Lord, you and I have been through some really hard stuff together over the past decade. Am I loved by you? And,
mm,
again, I feel like it's funny to think I'm going back to some very foundational Christian questions, but I think that's the journey for all of us. Like we are going deeper and deeper and deeper. Sometimes I think we think we're circling back to the same things and we're like, oh, why am I still here? But I do think we are circling back in the fullness of time, but deeper. Like each time God's like peeling more layers back. Yes, I know you. Yes, I love you. Yes, I'm good. And so Known was kind of born out of that and born out of this thing that we talked about earlier that I was seeing in my own soul, but seeing in a lot of the church was this like pressure to like make a name for yourself, even in the kingdom.
mm,
And sort of this pressure to like, I'm going to save the world by doing these big, amazing things. And it's like, I felt like nobody was sort of honoring a small, faithful life lived each and every day. Love your neighborhood, love God, love your neighbors. It's like nobody was like saying that's an amazing thing that changes the world. So this concept I think of just that God knows us, God loves us, and God names us. Like that's how
mm,
intimately God knows us. And what does it mean for the Christian to live from that place and minister from that place and lead from that place and love other people from that place? Again, going back to this idea of like not for approval, but from it. I think that's freedom. There's freedom there. That's God's invitation. That's God's invitation for you and me and for the church. And it's good. I mean, that's, I think, part of it too, is I'm like, oh yeah, Lord, as I'm writing this book, I'm like, because you're a writer, Jesse. I think I think with my fingers, I pray with my fingers, I figure out what I mean and what I want and what I know as I'm typing.
Yeah.
And so
And then
some
you
of
go
the,
back and read it and it like
yeah,
teaches
you're like,
you. You're like, oh
oh
yeah, that was
wait,
really good. I think I need to know that today.
yeah. So I think that's part of the journey as I was writing was like, oh God, you are good. Oh, you are
Mm,
intimately involved in our lives. You do speak to your children. You do welcome and love us. You do have a purpose for us. Oh, I think I forgot. God, thank you. So
mm.
the book is really sort of, I do look at, from Genesis to Revelation scripture about the image of God and what does that actually mean, and then how do we live from that place. So that's a long elevator pitch for Known. And anyway, you can find Known is wherever books are sold, or you can find on my website aubreysampson.com, or I'm at obsamp on social media, mostly Instagram.
Awesome. Well, I think no matter what thing God has asked people to do, and I call that their assignment, whether that is,
Mm.
responsibility at their job or serving in their neighborhood or serving in their apartment complex or just, taking care of their family, like no matter what that assignment is, the more we can find God's joy and
Mm.
he abides in us, like
Yeah.
first, like, and live
Yeah.
from that wellspring, the the less toxic environments will create,
So
no
good.
matter
So true.
what
Yep.
the ripple effect is. So I think everyone should pick up your book, and that's truly what I think. So I think it'll help all of us. Um,
Thanks, Jesse.
look a little more like Jesus.
Look a
So
little more
I
like
appreciate it.
Jesus. That's a good goal right
A little
there.
more like Jesus.